Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Starting school holidays. Some of you, yeah? Others are going, didn't know that. Well, I always promised myself I'd never preach through the book of Job or Ecclesiastes in the middle of winter, but here we are. And we're going to begin this series today. Basically, as an introduction to the book of Ecclesiastes. We need to have a little bit of background to understand the context and how it is that will affect us going forward into looking at this book. So let me lead us in prayer, and we'll then open the scriptures together. Lord, thank you that this book of Ecclesiastes is found in your word to strengthen us. And by doing that, Lord, it allows us to ask bigger questions. Lord, it's an unusual book, and we just need the revelation that you can bring to be able to drop it through the filter of our mind into our hearts and ultimately into our hands and feet as it affects what we do and where we go. So, Father, open the eyes of our understanding today, and may your blessing be on your word in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, the book of Ecclesiastes, what is it? Well, I can tell you what it isn't. That's helpful. It's not a history book, okay, like the book of Exodus that tells the history of Israel. It's not prophecy like Revelation or Ezekiel or Isaiah. It's not songs like Psalms. It's not a narrative that tells a story like we might have about King Josiah. It's not poetry like we would find in the Song of Solomon. It's not a biography like we find in the Gospel, a biography of Jesus. It's not doctrine like we find in Romans. And it's not a character study as such like we would look at the life of King David from childhood through to his old age. But it is what does come from the wisdom books or the wisdom literature. And essentially, it's a lot of observations and questions that are being asked by King Solomon. Now, Solomon lived this audacious life. Audacious meaning he had everything he wanted, and he wanted everything, and he tested and tried everything. And he gets to the end of his life, and he starts to say, wow, that was an amazing trip, but it was all pretty meaningless. And so through the eyes of King Solomon, we're going to look into the godless abyss, okay? What does this world offer if it was not for God? What does this world offer if it was not for God? So let's have a quick look as we go through this. Let's get ourselves started. Firstly, King Solomon was the third king of Israel. We had King Saul, King David, and then Solomon. Now, Solomon's parents had sort of got themselves in trouble because Solomon's mum was Bathsheba, and David had an affair with her, and the first child that was conceived died not long after it was born. But Solomon was the second child born, and there were 5 children born to David and Bathsheba. And so it's a funny sort of scenario, isn't it? You're born into this relationship, born into this family, and your parents have got this sort of dodgy thing that went on when they first got together. But what we can see from this is it doesn't matter. In God's economy, it doesn't matter where you come from and how it is that you were established on this planet. God opens up opportunities, and he is always searching for a person with character who will willingly seek the Lord, and that will open up opportunities. It doesn't matter where you were born or who you were born to. So we've got King Solomon. He was the son of David, and he was given a unique responsibility. You see, David as a king was a fantastic king, but when he came to build the temple for the Lord, that permanent structure for the Lord in Jerusalem, God said, no, you can't do this. You got too much blood on your hands, David. You're a fighting man, you're a fighting king. And so David probably had the hump about that in a way, because he really wanted to do this. So he goes and gets together all the stone, all the wood, gets the gold and the silver and the likes, and he pulls it all together and then says, your job, son, your job, get this done. But it's all there, all the materials are there. Okay, and so Solomon does this work at the beginning of his kingship. The other thing that, of course, Solomon is famous for is his wisdom. And when we say famous, he was famous throughout the land and throughout the known world for how wise he was. And in 1 Kings, we get to see this little story about how it is that he got this wisdom from God. So let's just have a quick look at that. It said, your servant, this is Solomon speaking here, your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment and administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Nor will there ever be. God goes on to tell him that not only are you going to get wisdom, but I'm going to give you wealth anyway. I'm going to give you everything that you need to run this nation and to be blessed. And so this way of the wise really is the reason why we got this title. This is Solomon's setup for this whole story. Solomon, of course, has been imbued with wisdom, but now he starts to exercise this wisdom and he starts to outwork his life in the context of being king. And so we find ourselves now seeing the impact of this wisdom. And one of the stories that we're told is how David establishes this wisdom in an unusual way. One story we're given in scripture is that two prostitutes were living together and they both had a baby. And one of them smothered her baby and killed the child, but in the middle of the night swapped babies with the mother whose child was alive. And the mother knew that this had happened, and so she was deeply concerned by this, and so she appealed to the king and said, hey, this is what's happened. And the other woman said, no, it was her baby who died. So Solomon does this unusual thing, which we don't recommend in counseling these days, but he grabs the baby and he pulls out his sword and he says, I'll chop this baby in half and you can have half each. And one woman goes, oh, that's all right. And the other woman goes, no, let her have the child. So immediately Solomon knew that she was the mother because she loved this child more than she wanted it to be killed. So an unusual scenario, but nonetheless a wise way of handling things. And his reputation preceded him as somebody you don't go to for family counselling. However, 2,200 kilometres away, the Queen of Sheba heard about the famous Solomon and his relationship to the Lord. She came to test Solomon with hard questions, arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan, with camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold and precious stones. She came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for the king to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She was overwhelmed. She traveled 2,200 kilometers from a place that we now know as Yemen, which is just south of Oman, which is just south of the United Arab Emirates, which probably means nothing to most of us. But it's a long way to travel and a long way to travel back. But she was deeply impressed. And the first thing that she was deeply impressed with was his relationship with God. So all of this wisdom and all of this wealth and all of this power was a continuation or an extension of his relationship with the Lord. So he was a wise guy, okay? He was probably as famous as Taylor Swift is right now. Hopefully a little bit more knowledge. But we find ourselves now set up for this story that begins in an unusual way. So the first 11 verses are a little bit like a prequel to, or prologue to a book that you might read. And it just gives you a little bit of a summary of what you're going to read, or a little bit like a trailer for a movie. You know, you see the trailer and you get an idea of what you're in for. Well, this is how Ecclesiastes starts in the first 11 verses. And it starts off by saying this. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams came from, there they return again. All the things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again, What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and not even those yet to come will not be remembered. And even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Well, that made your day, didn't it? Eh? That made your day. The way of the wise. And why are we calling this the way of the wise? The way of the wise is the way that which we ask questions. You see, the thing about Jewish education is that it wasn't about the answer, it was about the quality of the question. If you would come with a question and somebody presents you with a better quality question, you're a better student than somebody who just gets the answer. And so Solomon is essentially musing, creating observations, rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are the ones that aren't expected to be answered. You know, it's a little bit like when mum says, have you made your bed yet? That's actually not a question to be answered. It's just a statement which says, have you made your bed? And so Solomon is on the same track. He's asking questions by making observations about his life and how he's come to some ultimate conclusions about the life that he's had. And so he begins, and it starts off quite despairing, doesn't it? Meaningless. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And you go, well, that's pretty depressing, really. And I know myself when I was come back from overseas, done my OE, nice time of adventure, free as a bird, a few years overseas. And I come back and I was sitting around the dining room table with my parents and some of their friends. And I said, oh man, you know, life sounds like a bit of a drudge from here on in. 8 till 5, mortgages, you know, things like that. I was getting married and it was cool. I was looking forward to that. But you could just see the pattern rolled out in front of you, the pattern of what everybody else has done and how you get ahead in life. It was like, you know, just work hard, save your money. And just seemed a little bit, you know, wow. And so we identify with what King Solomon is saying here. It all seems in the deepest, darkest recesses of our sleepless night, it can all seem a bit meaningless. You know, people have come, people have gone, nations have come, nations have gone, empires have come, empires have gone. You know, history is littered with nations who thought they had the right to reign for eternity, and they're not here anymore. And so Solomon is asking the question, what do people gain from all their labors of which they toil under the sun? This is probably the key question of the whole of this book of Ecclesiastes. What do we get for what we've been given? What do we get for what we've been given? And when we realize that from the Garden of Eden, we've been told that we're people who are broken, we are sinful by nature, and we essentially live under a curse, we're told that this is how we will live. It says that by the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground. Since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. Well, you don't slap that one on the fridge and say, yeah, I'm going to have a great day today, do you? You know, it's tough stuff. It's tough stuff. You know, and yet this is the condition, the human condition that we all contend with. And the beauty of what Solomon does is he's asking questions that we're too scared to ask of ourselves or even ask of others, or to make observations that we're too scared to acknowledge. You know, we live in a faith community, and when you just walk into somebody's dining room and say, it's all meaningless, it doesn't sound like it's very faith-filled. But Solomon gives us permission to ask these questions. And I think it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful gift that you are given when you're allowed to ask these questions. So Solomon says, what do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. And this is true. Generations have come and have gone. All these different empires, the Egyptian empire, the Assyrian empire, the Roman empire, Genghis Khan, the Mongolian empire. You know, more modern times we had Hitler raised up National Socialism, the Third Reich, and for a season had his day and his way. The British Empire were on that wane of what it used to be. The British had dominion over a third of the world from that little nation on the left-hand side of the English Channel. It's remarkable, isn't it? Generations come and generations go. This picture here is of a temple called the Artemision. And here the worship was of a woman goddess called Artemis, a woman who was known as a goddess of fertility. And this temple was the wealthiest thing for hundreds of years going in Asia Minor. It was so wealthy that kings and nations used to loan money off it to be able to establish their infrastructure. It was so wealthy, it was incredibly influential. This building was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. It was so beautiful and so big. And a few years ago, Michaela and I were in Turkey and we went and visited it. And such is what happens. Such is what happens. It's quite depressing. The thing is that Solomon says, no one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. So people who are yet to be born will not be remembered by those who are going to follow them. Now here's a statue. This is somebody you should know. Anybody know who this is? So his name's Charles Jordan, and he lives in Wharapai Domain, right beside the Tauranga Domain there. He was the mayor of Tauranga for five times voted in as a mayor of Tauranga. He was the vicar of Holy Trinity for 39 years. Do we know him? No, we don't. Is Solomon accurate in what he said? No one remembers? It's true. Now he just has the pleasure of listening to some chill reggae beats when the One Love concert turns up at the Wharapai Domain, you know. If you watch closely, you'll see his little concrete hand going like that. You see? All that to say, generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows at the south and turns to the north, and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return. Now, you've got to realize that the view of the world was very agricultural, an agrarian view of the world. Seasons, you know, like planting in spring, growing in summer, harvesting in autumn, fallow in winter, and cyclical. So what's being described to us here is very much the cycles of the world. You know, Solomon would see the rain come down, the rivers filled up with the ocean, and the ocean never seems to get any fuller. That's a bit weird. The sun sort of goes from there to there. These were the days before they had this thing called the Copernican shift, which people realized that the earth actually goes around the sun. We used to think that the earth was the center of the universe and the sun moved around us, but they got that wrong. And of course, you know, all these different things that they didn't fully understand. And so he's trying to explain the world, but it's cyclical, it's rhythmic, but it's boring. You know, it's meaningless. And for us, as we consider these words, we look at it from this picture of what is meaningless and what is purposeful. And that's what our life is about, isn't it? We're trying to split the difference between what has meaning and what has purpose. Yeah, that's what it's all about. I can remember as a child hanging out with my cousins on a summer's day. We're playing with the hose. I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And my mum and dad came out and said, "Put the hose away, kids, you use too much water, blah, blah, blah." And we pleaded with them, and we got a bucket full of water each. Okay? Life was tough. Bucket full of water. And my cousin, who was a few months older than me and wiser, because she was a girl, she said, "Hey, look, if you get your bucket of water and you put a spoon in it and go fast, you'll see that it increases the amount of water in the bucket." Like, oh, she says, "Look, the sides rise as you do this because you're creating a little whirlpool." I was like, "Whoa, you're right, it does." It was amazing. So if we keep stirring, we'll be able to increase more water. And so we did that for an hour. You know, you folks who are raised on PlayStation, you got no idea what you're missing. Seriously. You know, no idea what you're missing. Those amazing things we got to do. There's a song by John Mellencamp. So a few years old. And it starts off with, goes like this. Little ditty about Jack and Diane, 2 American kids in the heartland. And it goes on to talk about a pretty rough sensual relationship that they've got. And they go off into another state and they start a family accidentally. And, well, yeah, I suppose it's accidentally. And but there's this killer line in the song, and it says, "Oh yeah, life goes on long after the thrill of living is gone." It's a great line, and it's like, that line is so great, it shouldn't be in a song like this. You know, because this song is just really about life, two young kids making their way, having a kid and getting on. But life goes on long after the thrill of living is gone. I can remember sitting in a traffic jam in the UK every morning and going under this flyover. And some smart aleck in the middle of the night obviously climbed over the flyover with a can of paint or spray paint and wrote on the flyover, "Admit it, you are bored." I'm like, you know, and you can sort of see thousands of cars going underneath going, yeah, we're bored, you know, the thrill of living is gone. Hey. And this is what Solomon is trying to say to us. It's like, hey, it's chasing after the wind. All this chasing after pleasure, all this chasing after wealth. It's like, I mean, try it sometime. It's stupid, isn't it? Do I look stupid doing this? Trying to catch the wind. You know, it's a pointless exercise. And we're bringing ourselves now to sort of almost like a depressive state if we follow Solomon's thinking. And when I say that, his thinking actually lines up with the bottom of the tank that the philosopher Bertrand Russell says about the meaning of life. An atheist philosopher in that. He says, what else is there to make life tolerable? We stand on the shore of an ocean, crying to the night and to emptiness. Sometimes the voice of one drowning, and in a moment the silence returns. The world seems to me quite dreadful. The unhappiness of many people is very great, and I often wonder how they all endure it. It is usually the central thing around which their lives are built. And I suppose if they did not live most of their lives in the things of the moment, they would not be able to go on. Wow, that's sad, eh? Yeah, there's a 90, he lived to 98, Bertrand Russell, and that was his best shot at trying to summarize what the world is all about. So Solomon is asking these deep searching questions, which we often have but we don't talk about. And that's the beauty of this book, is it raises stuff that we think about at 2 or 3 in the morning when we can't think. Sorry, no, we can think. We can't sleep. Yeah? Those times, at that time of the morning when you're lying in bed and you haven't slept all night and you're going, tomorrow's going to be a sucky day because I haven't slept. And so tomorrow's just going to be worn out and tired. It's all meaningless, meaningless, meaningless. Again, the teacher was king over Israel and Jerusalem. He's talking about himself. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, are chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. And so here we have Solomon introducing the fact that he has been an explorer, if you like, a scientist of what it is that a human being can do to get the maximum out of their life. And we're told that this is a heavy burden that God has put on mankind. And it is a heavy burden. And what we're going to discover as we go through this book is that the heavy burden, instead of being cursed, will actually be something that will define us. You see, the heavy burden ultimately will give us strength. And Solomon leans into this as we get on in this book. But he's also wanting to put to death the idea that the pursuit of wealth and sensual pleasure is not going to achieve what you think it will. And that's the truth of it. You know, if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. Okay, so you're stuck there. All right, and so we're told that if you have more money, you'll be better off. Now, most of us would like to test that for ourselves, but most of us won't get the chance to do that. And history, again, is littered with people who have pursued the wealth and pursued sensual pleasure and have had a miserable existence. A miserable existence. People who have died lonely, died unwell, died without any satisfaction. So this is how King Solomon worked the angles. He said, I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Okay? But it's this burden that is going to be for Solomon the thing that defines him. You see, for all of us, when we start to struggle, when we start to suffer, we take what James has said to us later on, some hundreds of years later, and we realize that God is in the midst of our struggle. If we don't find God in the midst of our struggle, we're not looking hard enough, or we're continuing to find or seek to find wisdom in the wrong places. You see, suffering produces perseverance, James says. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. So in the struggle that we have when we're trying to make sense of this life and things aren't going well, there's sickness in the family, lack of financial momentum, maybe death of a loved one, all of these things happen to us. And yet we're told that in the hard times, that's where we're shaped, and that is where we find God. That is where we find God. And we don't like that because we think we'd like to find God with the more zeros that we have in our bank account. Yeah? Listen to the guy who suffered the most talk about wisdom, Job. Any of you don't understand Job? Job had it all and God took it all away. Even to the point where he was covered in boils. And his mates turned up and told him that he must have sin in his life because look at all these stink things that have happened to him. But Job says this, but where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell? No mortal comprehends its worth. It cannot be found in the land of the living. The deep says, it's not in me. The sea says, it's not with me. It cannot be bought with the finest gold, nor can its price be weighed out in silver. Where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed even from the birds in the sky. Destruction and death say, only of a rumor of it has reached our ears. God understands the way to it, and he alone knows where it dwells, for he views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. And carries on. When he established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when he made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm, then he looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. And he said to the human race, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. So for all the hopelessness, all the meaninglessness, all the chasing after the wind, we are finally given a glimpse of hope. And that wisdom, which is what we need to live this life, is found by fearing the Lord. Found by living in his presence, by understanding his ways and wanting to do the things that God calls us to do. And so we find ourselves saying, what are the ways of the wise? The ways of the wise are to take the challenges that we experience and to press into them, to be able to experience God in a new way, in a fresh way, in a way that brings purpose rather than meaninglessness. Solomon, again, he said, I said to myself, look, I've increased in wisdom more than anyone else who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I've experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied it to myself, the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. So in these coming chapters, we're going to see what it is that he actually did. And he mentions here that he got into madness and folly, which is essentially just sensual entertainment, satisfying every part of his existence, from food to alcohol to sex. All of these things he tests himself with. And he comes out the end and says it's just all meaningless. Because there's a burden that you pay for having wisdom. And it comes out in the last verses we'll look at this morning. It says, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. You see, when you know stuff and you see other people doing dumb stuff, you go, why are you doing that? And that gives you grief, And so as we increase in wisdom, as we increase in understanding, the disparity between those, or the difference between those who have that wisdom and those who see what's going on in the world, it only brings them down. I don't know if you've noticed, but with the onset of social media and the internet age, which I have experienced, I've gone from making more water in a bucket to actually knowing how to ask questions on Google. The world isn't a happier place. We've got lots of knowledge, but it hasn't given us meaning, hasn't given us purpose, hasn't given us significance. In fact, it's probably given us more fear and sense of anxiety than anything else. Did you know that Mount Etna is blowing up on Sicily right now? Gee, I hope you can eat your lunch with the fear of that. What I'm saying here is that we know about everything that goes on, and it brings fear and anxiety. And so we have to be very careful about how we use wisdom and what it does to us. And so here is, again, Solomon saying, wisdom is fantastic, but it has to be used wisely and it has to be used well. For us, the way of the wise is about the ways of the fear of the Lord. And in the coming weeks, we're going to explore with Solomon things that we'll never ever get to experience. Thankfully, I say. But what we're also going to do is discover a language and permission to explore the deepest parts of our own soul. That's the beauty of this book. It gives us permission to wrestle with God in the wee small hours of the night or wherever you're wrestling with God and say, God, this has been my experience too. I struggle with a lack of direction. I struggle with momentum. I struggle with purpose. I struggle with my identity. I struggle with how it is that I see my life being outworked. I look at my life and I think, gosh, there's more of my life in the rear vision mirror than there is through the front windscreen. What am I going to do with the rest that I've got? How does this all work out? Welcome, Solomon would say, welcome to the human experience. And yet we're not to be depressed. We're to be people of hope because we live in the fear of the Lord. It's a beautiful thing. Let's stand for prayer. Father, as we all stop and consider where we might be at any given time in this journey of life, we're given moments in life where we feel that we're experiencing this dark, dark night of the soul. And for some, it might be more than a night. It could be a week. It could be a month. It could be years. Where we're saying, hey, what on earth is this all about? Why am I struggling so much? Where is God? Why do my prayers just seem like a big echo chamber where nothing comes back? Lord, we want to journey with Solomon and explore this so that we can be people who ask a better set of questions, who can consider this as part of the human experience without looking at ourselves as being people who are being punished. Lord, we come to you and we say, open the eyes of our understanding in the weeks ahead. May we be people who explore the depths of our humanity through Solomon's experience. May we be people who are richer because our lives are broader, our understanding more complete. And when in the times of struggle and the times of suffering, that perseverance comes and it shapes character, which brings hope. These are the things that we seek because you are the God we fear and live in awe of. And so we do this with Solomon and we do this for your sake. In Jesus' name, amen.